Sorry, which one?
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and make a start of it. I know Chris is letting the school group into the church, so she'll join us here in a minute as well. So, welcome to whatever installment this is in our journey through the book of Genesis. You do have on your seat the little flyer, and you've probably noticed it has the dates and the readings for this 4-week session, as well as the dates and the reading for the next 4-week session, which will start at the end of April. So, yeah, so take it with you, put it in your diary, and after the one in April and May, we'll be done with Genesis, and we'll pick something else to do next time.
Will be.
It makes my head hurt thinking about it. All right, why don't we start with a moment of prayer. God, we give you thanks for the sunshine today and the beautiful weather as we start this next unit of our Bible study. We invite you into our time together to guide our conversations, to open our hearts and our minds to the scripture and the word that you have for us through our conversation today. We give you thanks for the chance to be able to gather and study your word together. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. Well, I had in my notes to ask if there was anything we needed to follow up on from last time, but I suspect it's been long enough that no one remembers exactly what we talked about the last time. So just as a way of a brief orientation to where we are, the last chapter, the last story that we looked at in the last session was in chapter 22, and that was the God commanding Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. So that's good to know, not just to remind us of where we're starting from, but I think to keep that story and what happened in that story in the back of our minds as we look at some of the things going on in chapters 23 to 26, which we'll look at today. It's just interesting to think about the relation between the action in that chapter and then what we're going to read about today. So we've got a few, each chapter kind of has its own topic. We'll talk about the death of Sarah. We'll talk about Isaac and Rebekah. We'll talk about the death of Abraham, and then we'll get over to Esau and Jacob as well. So lots of interesting things to consider as we go forward. So before we get started, is there anything in particular for anyone that came up as you were doing the reading that you want to make sure that we talk about today, so that if it's not in my notes, I'll make sure that we pay some attention to it?
Why is Abraham in the land of the Hittites?
Okay.
I couldn't go all through the preamble. Why was he not in his homeland?
Okay.
And why did the Hittite guy, I'm not too sure, Abraham only asked for his Sarah's tomb, for a cave.
Yeah.
But he insisted he bought he said, no, have the whole field as well.
Okay.
It seems a lot of toing and froing. He's made
If
the request.
if they're supposed to be sort of enemies, or, you know,
Yeah.
What's their relationship with the Hittites? It sounds like they get on quite well.
Yeah, very generous.
Or with that particular Hittite. But
Yeah.
he asked the king first, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's part of the action in chapter 23. Sarah dies. Abraham needs to have a place to bury her. They are in the land of the Hittites. I can't tell you off the top of my head why they necessarily are there, although keeping in mind Abraham and Sarah moved so many different times for so many different reasons. The other thing that's not clear coming into this is how far removed this story is from the previous chapter. There's not really, doesn't say immediately after that Sarah died. It could be, months or a few years. It could be 20 years, given the time frame, that they say that the length of their lives that are recorded. So the other thing that explains a little bit of sort of the back and forth and the sort of oddly specific debating about the nature of where and how much land and how much it's going to cost, and oh no, I don't want any money. Oh well, what's it worth? Well, it's worth this. Here's your money. So we've talked previously about the different sort of streams of authorship and editorship as it relates to Genesis, and how different parts move between these different groups. And so this chapter is an example of, if you'll remember, one of those groups was the priestly tradition. And the priestly tradition is sort of comes from the standpoint of being very concerned about protocol and tradition and specifics. So, for example, later on in Exodus, when you get all the rules about the tabernacle, and it has to be so big, and it has to be, fabric has to be this color, and it has to be made of this particular material, and all those kinds of things. That's what the priestly editors were really concerned about. They were recording, these very concerned about specifics and how things were taken care of. So that's a little bit of that. The other bit to know is that the specific place, this Machpelah, which is where the land is that Abraham buys, does fall within the boundaries of the Promised Land. So whether the issue of whether with the Hittites, I'll have to do a little more research on and give you an answer on that next week. But there's quite a bit of symbolism in the fact that she was buried in the Promised Land. And then over the course of the rest of Genesis, we'll see there's a number of people in this family tree who are taken back to the same place to be buried. So it becomes this sort of ancestral focal point.
Does anyone know where it is? Anyone ever found it?
No, there's, depending who you read, there's some suggestions. There's traditional places. I think probably if you toured in that area, they would take you to Sarah's tomb, but it's a bit of a guess as to whether or not that's actually, where she's buried. I think there's a tomb of the patriarchs somewhere. Does that sound right? I haven't toured in that part of the world, I don't know, but there's a few different places that claim to, have that.
Abraham's buried there as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So thinking about the death of Sarah, then, I mentioned we don't know relationally the difference in time that's transpired between this story and the previous story, which was the sacrifice of Isaac. Do you think it's a coincidence that her death follows that story? And I guess what I'm getting at is, and I think we talked about it a little bit the last time, but if you think about what would Sarah's impression and reaction have been when Isaac came back home from their camping trip and told her what had happened. What do you think the family dynamics were like after that?
wasn't best pleased, I know.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no account of it,
No.
you know, in the scripture, so we don't know, we're just, you know, sort of making some assumptions, but a couple of the commentaries I read kind of suggest, well, you know, maybe that kind of
Finish
did
it
her
off,
in.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's not entirely clear. The other thing that's interesting in this whole chapter that's very specific, again, as we mentioned, about protocol and tradition and sort of these functions of the priestly class. What details are there about the nature of the funeral or the nature of how people responded to the death? There's no reference
She
to,
was buried.
she was buried,
Yeah.
but there's no reference, spiritually, is kind of what I'm thinking. There's no reference to any sort of belief in afterlife. It doesn't appear that Abraham was, you know, burying the body with the expectation that, you know, the spirit or the soul was with God, or in Sheol even. You know, we see that a lot in the Old Testament. Sheol was the land of the dead, where it wasn't heaven or hell, it was just the land of the dead. But there's no reference to any of that. There's no real spiritual aspect. You don't see Abraham, as he so often has in the past, arguing with God about something, or talking to God about something.
Did she suggest that Sarah wasn't as convinced in following the Lord's will as Abraham was? She just went along with what he normally said.
Well, she probably wasn't too keen on the fact that God had told her husband to kill her son.
No,
so,
no.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
If she knew. she
But
might not know.
she's never seen, does anyone, when it's told that she's going to have a child, it's her husband who's told, he's not.
She laughs.
She laughs, she just overhears
Yeah.
it. She
Yeah.
never gets to the angels or anything coming to speak to
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
she's a mere woman.
It's just, I mean, I don't know if there's any significance one way or the other, and we've read the accounts of plenty of other people dying or having been killed in this narrative, and there's not really, you know, much around those either. It just kind of struck me as I read through this again, and how detailed the account is, but it's very much practical. You know, here's the land, here's the cost, here, you know.
But the Hittites want him to bury her in a tomb, so perhaps her burial customs were slightly more ornate than their, you know.
Yeah.
He said they can have the best of our tombs, so
Mhm.
obviously their customs were slightly different, and perhaps they thought he wasn't giving her enough honour, just burying her in a cave. You know.
Well, yeah,
Mm.
and that could very well be. And obviously, Abraham has some sort of gravitas towards, or in relationship with the Hittites. I mean, they treat him,
As a prince.
Yeah.
it says.
so,
Do you
yeah.
think it's important that he actually buys the land so it belongs to him? Do you think that's perhaps more meaningful than if he'd just accepted it would bury them in one of their caves?
I suspect, yeah. Well, and especially with the idea that, you know, it isn't explicitly mentioned here, but, you know, we know that Abraham and sons and grandsons and all that were brought back and buried in the same place, so he had, or the family had control and ownership of that. Yeah, I think that probably is a pretty significant, sort of thing.
Also, because he got the field, so was any sort of ceremony either this time or later on?
Yes,
He had space outside.
that's right.
He didn't have to just do all this in the darkness of a cave.
That's right, that's right.
Well, it says it was legally made over to him in the presence of all the Hittites. So it was obviously a formal ceremony, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just the whole little bit, it's quite interesting how, again, how specific and concerned about the protocol and the order of things that it is. So thinking about, what happens next. So Abraham is widowed. Immediately, it would seem, he moves forward with trying to get a wife for Isaac, who, does it mention, I want to say Isaac is nearly 40 years old at this time?
Yeah, it's 40 somewhere.
Yeah. So, well, so maybe it isn't immediately after Sarah's death, we don't really know, again, the time frame. But Isaac apparently has not found himself a wife, and Abraham is concerned about that. In part, he's concerned about it because he needs this to happen while he's still alive so that he can bless the wedding, the marriage. What other concerns does he have about the nature of who the potential daughter-in-law should be?
She's not from the Canaanites. Go to my own country, my own relatives, and get a wife from son Isaac.
Yes.
Well, there's other contenders for succession. But
Yeah,
Abraham's children.
yeah,
Yeah, and if they've already got a family well established, they'd have more support.
well, that's right, that's
And
right.
backing. Presumably, if he gets, because a marriage for his son is also, that's like a treaty with his son's,
Yeah,
with her parents.
yeah, yeah. So he gets his servant to swear an oath to him by putting his hand under his thigh, which is
Bizarre.
kind of an odd thing.
It's something that's still done, isn't it, some parts? So there's things like that done in various parts of the world. Even grabbing the genitals or something like that is, it's a real pact
Yeah.
between gentlemen, as it were.
Well, the only commentary I saw that really commented on it, which kind of surprised me, just because it's a sort of an odd detail, was just, that would have been a common symbol of taking an oath, and that the hand beneath the genitals connects to the vehicle of life, and that's how it was done. So I can't offer a lot more detail, but anyway, he swears the oath, and he heads off and encounters Rebekah at the well outside of the village. So it is a little unclear exactly what relation she is to, depending on what translation of the Bible you read, I should put it that way, as to what her relation is to Abraham and Isaac. So the NIV, which we have, says, she's the granddaughter, this is the servant speaking, the granddaughter of my master's brother. So,
His niece or great niece.
yeah, somewhere.
Yeah.
The English Standard Version says she's the daughter of my master's kinsman, which complicates things because the kinsman could be the brother or it could be the son of the brother. Anyway, the JPS, which is the Jewish translation of the Tanakh, says that she is my master's brother's daughter. But again, daughter could be a very generic term for any female descendant.
I think the important thing is that she is related.
She is related.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And so it does protect that sense of solidifying the family connection. And if we think back to it, we remember Sarah's relationship to Abraham is revealed at one point that they're half siblings. So theirs was an even closer relationship than being second or third cousins or whatever Rebekah is for Isaac. So one of the interesting things about this story is Abraham makes his servant swear the oath, tells him what he's going to do. The servant rehearses it in his head, what he's going to say, how he's going to do it. Then we hear the account of him engaging with Rebekah, and then later we hear the account again as he's with the family, explaining what happens.
It's like he's learning his lines.
Yeah, yeah. So the question is, Abraham, we know Abraham's connection and relationship with God. Abraham's servant, he says, like in verse 42 of chapter 24, he says, when I came to the spring today, I said, Lord, God of my master Abraham. So is the servant someone who has faith in God, or is the servant just, that's Abraham's thing and I'm just doing, the job? But as we go through that story, the servant makes it very clear that this is the work of God. Well, in fact, he does pray to God, doesn't he? He says, asks for a sign that she's the one. Rebekah, in this whole story, is really the one person that isn't really given any attachment to God. She seems to kind of operate independent of this, master plan. So I guess the question is, what do we think in this story? Is Rebekah acting on her own intuition and quality of character? Or is it the work of God that she shows up at the moment when the servant is there and says what the servant expects her to say to him?
Is it sort of like a bit of international diplomacy?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know. Abraham might have made contact with Laban in some way beforehand. I mean, she's set up for this sort of blind date, isn't she?
Well, yes, yeah.
The Good News Bible's got one of their little pictures of this going on.
She doesn't seem to ask any questions. She just accepts the fact that she's going to have a nose ring put in and bracelets on her arm.
Yeah.
She now belongs to somebody.
Yeah.
We don't get anything that she says. Who are you? Who is this chap?
And she does all of that before talking to
Before
the father or the
She
brother.
hasn't even told her mum. No.
That's it. Yeah.
If she's that high up in that family, why is she the one who's going out getting the water? It's something you get your slave or your servant to do.
Yeah.
It's almost like a sort of
Meant to be.
an assignation, but it's done in an open style. They're meeting in a public place, and to anyone watching, it looks perfectly sort of natural. I mean, Jesus did a similar thing.
Well, that's it. That's it. I mean, you think of all the other stories of encounters at the well.
It was a place where you knew you could meet ladies, wasn't it?
I think,
So, I mean,
I think it probably was, yeah.
It's, it must have had the same sort of connotations as nowadays. If you wanted to see,
Yeah,
if you're looking for a partner, it's a good place to have a look.
It's interesting that you get this story almost 3 times, because you get the servant
Yeah.
assuming that what he's been told he's got to do, then you get him doing it, and then you get the account. He's telling
Yes.
somebody else he's done it.
Yes.
So by the time you've read it, you've had the story 3 times, haven't you? Yeah.
And
That's it.
they seem to think it was worthwhile putting it all in
Yeah.
3
Yes.
times as well.
There's
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
some reason for putting it all in, because, you know,
Yeah,
by
it's
the time
in
you
the
get to the
third
end of it,
person and it's in the first
You can almost
Yeah.
say it yourself, couldn't
you
you?
recite it yourself, can't
Yeah.
you? Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, and we do, you know, we see that even in the Gospels. I'm thinking off the top of my head, so I may not be entirely correct, but I mean, in the when Jesus tells the disciples to go, get them the calf or the colt for Palm Sunday, it's kind of the same thing. He tells them to go do it, and they say, well, what do we say? And he tells them what to say, and then they go and they say it, and then they tell them later, oh, we said this, and then, you know. So,
Is there something special about doing it 3 times or something like that?
it may just be a literary trait of thinking about when these stories were originally told and would have just been transmitted orally, that, I mean, that's a way of helping to remember what happened. Now, then by the same token, you can say, well, why isn't everything else in triplicate? But perhaps different stories coming from different places at different times had different qualities to them. I think the other things just to note real quickly on this is, in this story, Rebekah is the one who sort of imitates Abraham, that she's the one that, on faith, leaves home and travels to this strange place, not Isaac. Isaac's not the one that has to uproot himself and go. When the servant brings her back, Isaac takes her into Sarah's tent. So I think there's symbolism in that, okay, Abraham and Sarah their story's done. And this is the new, generation of it. But the other interesting thing is that it does say in that chapter that Isaac was not living in the same place as Abraham at that time. So think back to, well, is that still fallout from what happened in chapter 22, that he don't want anything to do with him so much because of the attempted sacrifice? And apparently where Isaac was is where Sarah's tent was. I don't know, I may be reading stuff into it, but does that say,
So he's living
does
with his
Sarah
mother.
and Isaac go off and they lived over here and Abraham's living over here? There's no answer for that, just something I kind of popped up when I
Well,
was,
presumably it was Isaac who kept Sarah's tent. I mean, why, if Abraham moves out, why would he? There's still his tent
Yeah.
associated with Sarah.
yeah, well, yeah, and that could be, but anyway, that's the movement of that story. So do you think Abraham's servant, who obviously plays a big part in this whole transaction, does Abraham's servant represent maybe many of us who sort of who do the work of God in different ways, but do so anonymously, right? I mean, the servant, we don't hear from him again. We don't know his name, but obviously what he helped make happen was pretty important in the whole story of things. So maybe just,
He's obviously trusted because he's been given gold and silver jewellery, articles of clothing for the Rebekah's
Dowry.
mother and
Yeah.
things.
Bride provides a dowry, doesn't she? Yeah.
well, and you would have to think that the, there would have been a lot of pressure. You know, you think about what he's been asked to do, and what are the consequences if he comes home and is, well, she said no, you know, or they're all out of women, or, you know, whatever that, you know, he likely was quite relieved when she took all the jewelry and, you know, agreed to the marriage. So, anyway, all right, so keep moving here. So we move on to chapter 25. So this is the death of Abraham. So before reading or rereading this chapter in preparation for today, how many of us knew that Abraham had another wife and had all these other kids? Yeah.
We knew Jacob and Esau, but
Yeah.
Sarah thought they were not other children of Sarah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and I've read it before, and honestly, when I reread it, I thought, well, I don't remember that part. So he marries Keturah and has, I think it's six children with her, and it's interesting reading about it. I mean, I think the significance, again, is like some of these other genealogical accounts that we get throughout Genesis, that, you know, these children go off and they're the founders of these different groups of people that at various times, you know, Israel's going to come into contact with for good or ill, which again ties back into God's promise to Abraham of being the father of many nations. So this is, you know, we already have Isaac and Ishmael, who we know, you know, will kind of take up those roles. But then here is, you know, this other set, and then, you know, the grandchildren will as well. And I think verse 5 and 6 are interesting. Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. Okay. But while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east.
Paid them off.
Keep them sweet.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm assuming the concubines here are, maybe that's Keturah, maybe that is Hagar. Although Ishmael gets special treatment later, so he doesn't seem to fall into that group. Yeah. So he sends them off. He sends them to the east, which is where Cain and Lot are sent to the east. So that must not have been the best direction in which to go. Well, I suppose they couldn't go too far to the west or they'd run into the sea.
Presumably the gifts are livestock or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, it's quite clear from different parts of the Abraham story, and then in the next couple of chapters with the story about Isaac. I mean, they apparently were quite wealthy at that point. I mean, Abraham had a lot of
silver. It mentions the coins.
Yeah, yeah.
They weren't digging the silver out themselves. They were
No.
you know, trading that.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, so he kind of whatever, pays them off or gives them a grant and says, off you go. And then at 175, he dies. And just an interesting note, the phrase that's used here and used at other times in the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, is that he was gathered into his people. And that phrase only appears in those first 5 books of the Bible, which is kind of an interesting, I think it's kind of apparent what, the symbolism of that is, but it's not clear if that were a particular expression of some early Hebrew eschatology or belief in, he's gathered to his people. Is that just an image, or is that a belief that...
He's gone back to his ancestors.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll see that a few other times, but it's a particular phrase that's sort of unique to the early narrative books. Let me see. So then, for the burial, Ishmael comes back. And for the rest of that chapter, Ishmael and Isaac sort of exist as sort of co-equals. The way the narrative would be that they come back and they together they bury Abraham. None of the other children come back. So it's assumed Ishmael was at least in some sort of relationship or contact with Isaac or Abraham somehow. Ishmael knew that he had died. So what are the implications theologically about the fact that Abraham's story does not end just with Isaac, but ends with Isaac and Ishmael? What is that? What do we think that says in thinking about the ways that Abraham was promised to be?
It says about later on that there's this hostility between their descendants. So
Yes.
It's setting us up to be ready for that.
Okay, laying the groundwork for future hostility. Yeah. So I was thinking too about the notion that we talk about the Abrahamic faiths, right? So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all of them trace their roots back and through Abraham. Islam certainly sees the connection through Ishmael. Now, obviously, at the time that this happened and that the account is written or formulated, there weren't Christians, there really weren't Jews, there weren't Muslims, certainly. So I don't know that the intent would not have been that, but it does suggest that that the descendants of Abraham, that was very important, that there were multiple different nations, the traditions that came out of that. Part of it, I think, was to verify the promise that you'll be the father of many nations. But it is interesting to think about the fact that at the end it's really narrowed down to these two. And I think just gives us something to think about when we think about like interfaith relationships and how we can relate to Muslims and where that shared heritage is, and how much of that we think about, how much they think about, how much just in general, it would seem this is kind of where it comes back to, is at the end it's Isaac and Ishmael together. So I don't think that will solve all the conflicts in the world, but something worth thinking about. All right, so then we move on to Jacob and Esau. There's probably footnotes in the Bible telling you this, but Esau means hairy. Later on, he's described as compared with Edom. Where is that?
It's just here that it says that Isaac was 40.
Oh, okay, yeah. Right.
Edom, red.
Edom means red, yep. Oh, and I skipped an important thing. We start seeing replays of previous storylines because Rebekah is barren, and God answers Isaac's prayer, and she becomes pregnant. So back to sort of Sarah's story in a way. And so
It's interesting they always said that she was barren, that she was childless.
yes,
Nothing to do with him in particular.
well, true.
He doesn't pray to make himself fertile. He makes him pray something.
Well, that's right. The other interesting bit about this little snippet of the story is she becomes pregnant. She says, "Why is this happening to me?" She's having a difficult pregnancy. So she goes to inquire of the Lord. And God gives this oracle. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the elder will serve the younger. So that kind of gets, says that, kind of gets pushed in the back, and we get on to the story of, the birth and the odd birth where Jacob comes out grabbing Esau's ankle. The name Jacob means grabs the heel, and it was a Hebrew idiom for someone who is deceptive. So it would be the same, I don't know what the equivalent necessarily would be, but it basically was, he was a con man. It was the implication of the name. Tell Jacob that when you get home.
Is that tradition a result of this story?
Well, I see what you're saying. Yeah, which came first? I don't know. But certainly that association was there. So I think there's 2 things going on in this chapter. So we have the story of the birth of the 2 boys, and the story of the selling of the birthright. Esau's out hunting and is famished, and Jacob's back cooking a stew, and for whatever reason, he says, Esau's just starving, and he says, well, I'll give you some if you give me your birthright. Oh yeah, okay, fine. And so they do that.
Looks like Faust, doesn't it?
Which is a little interesting. And the real significance of that is, the firstborn traditionally would receive a double portion of the inheritance. So, it's a financial transaction, it's a power move. There's all handful of different things going on in transaction.
Wouldn't it have to have been witnessed? How would Jacob prove otherwise?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Don't say.
I don't know. But it certainly plays to his character. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Let's see. I may be getting way ahead. Well, next week we'll talk about Jacob comes again and gets the blessing from Isaac as he's dying. But something to think about as you're reading that story for next week in chapter 27 is think back to this oracle that Rebekah receives when she goes to consult God about her difficult pregnancy.
Again, we've got somebody saying what God said.
Okay, yeah, second-hand
So
account.
where does all this come from? When people say God said, well, we know he didn't say it, so did he put the ideas into her head, or is it what she thought? Or she said, I'm having this trouble, I think these babies are going to not get on with each other, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean...
That's a good question. That's a good question. If she received this oracle, though, in some form or fashion, so how will that influence her actions in what happens in chapter 27? So I'll leave it there. We'll talk about it next week. But I invite you to think about that as you read forward is, did she tell Isaac about this? Does he know what the oracle is?
Interesting.
Is her action, does her action bring about the result of the oracle, or do things happen because God said they're going to happen this way?
Look at verse 28, which is the throwaway phrase, Isaac loved Esau, Rebekah loved Jacob.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so is that, so, yeah.
Have we got
So why is that?
sort of
Yeah, what's the,
tension in the family?
what creates that dichotomy? Is it related to that? Does she love Jacob because God's basically said Jacob's going to win? Or does she love Jacob because his character is more like hers and Esau is more like Isaac,
He
and they
stays
just,
at home. He stays at home.
He does stay at home.
Esau wants to go places
yeah,
and hunt.
yeah,
It's a bit like the other pair, isn't it, earlier on?
yes,
Cain
That's
and
right.
Abel.
Yeah.
They,
very much.
one was more domesticated than the other, so
Yeah. So that storyline then is kind of interrupted by this equally strange account of Isaac and Abimelech. Which we talked earlier about aspects of the stories being repeated and repeated. What does this sound like? Abraham and Sarah, exactly. Almost verbatim, you know? I mean, it's the same kind of setup. It's, you know, it's the same story that Isaac tells about Rebekah, and then when the king finds out, you know, oh, this horrible, you know, thing that you brought on us. And so it's very, so we see that kind of that same story, you know, Rebekah's barren, God's consulted, she becomes pregnant, Isaac and Rebekah are traveling to avoid natural disaster, and they come into a land, and Isaac passes off his wife as his sister. the same way that Abraham does to Sarah.
Is
The
this the
story's
first
out
time?
of sync because
Ah,
she's already had children in 25.
well, it could be. I mean, it does seem to not so much fit right there, because you have the first part of Jacob and Esau, and then you have this story, which they don't really appear in at all. And then, and then you get to 27, and it picks up again on the Jacob and Esau story. Could be.
Is this the first time that the Philistines enter into the narrative?
It's probably, I think it's probably one of the first times we've heard of them. Yeah. I kind of wonder too, if this is the story of Abraham and Sarah, and again, we talk about transmission through the generations, that these stories would have been told for a long time before they were ever written down. So at some point then, does it get kind of misconstrued, and it also becomes a story about Isaac and Rebekah? Again, I'm not an ancient Hebrew scholar, so I can't offer a lot in regards to that. But it does feel a little bit out of place.
Also, I read about in verse 16, Abimelech saying to Isaac, basically, go, you've become too powerful.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, again, that speaks to whether it was the wealth, or whether it was some sort of reputation, or whether it was some sort of whatever it was, that, I mean, Abraham also had kind of that quality that a lot of the people that he encounters, who are kings or princes or, rulers of some sort, that you would think would have controlled and demanded more power and respect than, this.
So they try to sabotage his livelihood, don't they, by filling the wells up?
Yeah. But I mean, the fact that I think that even back to the burial of Sarah, that he goes to this, whatever, privy council sort of thing, and is able to negotiate this, and oh no, we'll just give it to you, and there's obviously something, and it may just be, they may just have been fantastically wealthy. I mean, look at how that gets you into places today. But for whatever reason, they had some sort of power. Or maybe it was something some aura they had, because God's pushing all this promise through that family. But yeah, obviously whatever it was, they get in these situations seemingly by their own poor judgment, and they usually come out better on the other end of it. So I don't know if that's direction to us or not, but anyway, and then at the very end of that chapter, verse 34, Esau gets married, and they were a source of grief for Isaac and Rebekah, and that's really all it says. Doesn't give any reason, but they were caused him problems. And so what's interesting there, I think, is that both Isaac and Rebekah, they weren't a source of grief to Rebekah because she liked Jacob better. They were a source of grief to both of them.
It's just because they're Hittites and they don't want.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. And maybe that's what Abraham was trying to avoid when he sent his emissary on to find a wife for Isaac. That was a lot. Any other thoughts or questions before we go? So,
How often do the Jews use these parts of Genesis in their worship? I mean, do they have regular? I mean, some bits we know are only read once a year or something. Like that.
yeah.
Don't they read through the whole of the Torah? I think same as we have a lectionary, I think they read the whole of the Torah.
But some things will only come up once, whereas other things must presumably will come up more often. I would have thought the Ten Commandments are probably more likely to be read.
I thought they read through it sort of religiously from beginning to end, but don't know. I'll look it up.
To memorise it.
I'll look it up.
I would have thought the Psalms, I mean, other Psalms do with some.
Yes.
I think they just go through the whole lot, regardless.
Well, so my thought is, as we progress deeper and deeper into Genesis, this is really a remarkable way to tell your origin story, don't you think? You're trying to tell a story about God, and
Man keeps getting in the way.
yes,
You keep messing it up.
that's
don't
right.
they,
That's
really?
right. It's just interesting to think about if you were going to write a story to convince everybody that your God was the God. Is this the story you would write?
Don't think so.
It's just interesting to kind of think about that.
There's nothing new under the sun.
No, well, that is true.
Sibling rivalry and etc.
They are very relatable themes.
Yeah.
That is for sure. That is for sure. So, so I have a quick song to end with. The music today is a song called Again and Again. It goes right to what you were saying, Sonia. It's by the group called The Many, M-A-N-Y, and it connects the seeming repetition of both good and bad that we see in this Genesis narrative and other parts of the Bible, with the same sort of hopeless repetition that we see when we watch the news at night. But it reminds us that God's love and mercy are also always present in the midst of our lives, no matter what is going on or what is being repeated. So, I'll leave you with the music.